Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Mac and cheese. Creamy, comforting, and deeply American. Or is it? What if this iconic dish actually tells a much older story, one that begins in ancient times, crosses continents, and reveals how food carries history, identity, and even myth? Today, we're joined by food historian Karima Moyer-Nocchi, whose work explores the deep connections between food, culture, and history. In her latest book, The Epic History of Macaroni and Cheese from Ancient Rome to Modern America, she traces the journey of this beloved dish across time and geography, uncovering not just recipes, but the myths, migrations, and cultural forces that shaped it. Through what she calls historiphagy, or eating history, she invites us to experience the past in a deeply human and sensory way. So don't go anywhere, ma prima pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring in person or online to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Karima, it's such a pleasure to have you back at the Italian Radio Hour. Welcome, welcome. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm well. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
It's been a couple of years since we got to know each other. And so I would like to kind of reintroduce you and your work to the audience. So before we dive into the mac and cheese conversation, would you mind starting by telling us a little about your journey as a food historian? How did you get started in this fascinating field?
Well, I've always had an affinity to food. And I think that it's like a calling, and so those of us who are in it, we know that we're simply drawn to it. Culinary historians today, of my generation anyway, we all bring something from our education in a different field and bring that into culinary history. So I moved to Italy then more than 35 years ago. And when I was here, now it may sound odd that I was kind of the culture shock was that there weren't other foods. It was all Italian. And I know that sounds really silly, but it is a shock. And I thought that my role in food then in Italy was going to be as kind of an ambassador of the other areas that I knew in food. So like Thai food, Mexican food. I studied Indian food, and I went abroad to study these and bring these back. And then um, I had also, being in Italy, of course, taken up the study of Italian, the history of Italian food. And one day when I was out running and I was listening to a podcast talking about Terra Madre and my grandmother this and my grandmother that and I'm thinking, well, why aren't we actually speaking to the grandmothers about those dishes? And so from that came my book, if I can show the book.
Did
Came
you
my
chew the fat?
came my
Mhm.
book chewing the fat.
Yes, that was also a great conversation. So we'll link to that episode.
Okay.
Absolutely. Mhm.
And Chewing the Fat is it's called an oral history of Italian food ways from fascism to dolce vita. That I do a reconstruction of the fascist period through the lens of food and with oral histories of women who were in their 90s. So that was an incredible journey for me. When I engaged in so much myth busting of things that I as well believed were part of Italian food history because I had been always told that and everyone else believed it. But this really unveiled a lot of things for me. And I engaged then in my experience of being in Italy in a way that is absolutely invaluable of speaking to so many women who were in their 90s about this period of time that they experienced
Mhm.
because it's very much not spoken about.
Mhm.
And um, I then moved on to my second book, which is The Eternal Table.
Mhm.
And that is a cultural history of food in Rome. So you've got the 2,500 years of looking at the food. And I wanted to do, after a very heartfelt book, which is Chewing the Fat, I wanted to move on to something that was more scholarly.
Mhm.
And so coming from that, then I was able to put something more heartfelt and scholarly into this third book, which is the epic history of macaroni and cheese.
Mhm. So let's actually dive in a little bit. You are originally from Ohio, is that correct? Or and if it's not, please correct me. And what other food influences you might have experienced growing up? What would your comfort food, your to go to comfort food growing up?
So I was not born, but raised anyway in Toledo, Ohio,
Mhm.
which for at least a certain amount of time had the most restaurants per capita in the United States. There was an
Wow.
was that. So many restaurants, and the reality of that, which is why probably the shock when I came to Italy, just everything possible. Particularly though Middle Eastern food, because there was an important engineering faculty in at the university where I went to, and or at the university in the town, and so there was a lot of Middle Eastern food. And I really, in my naivete, really thought that that was how it was in other places. So that's where I was raised, and then I went to Massachusetts to do my graduate studies, and at that point I moved to Italy. There
Uh, yes. Mhm.
there was another part of your question I think I didn't answer.
No, no. What was your comfort food? Yes,
Oh my
growing
God.
up, then, so that we can then talk about the comfort
Ah.
food that everyone goes to here in the US. So, what were some of your food memories in your childhood?
Well, I have an odd kind of, especially because my father was the person who cooked in the house, and he had kind of an aversion to flavor, let's call it. No garlic, no onion, no that. It was also a period of time when food was very all of those technological innovations, like, we moved from space food, those space food sticks, and then Tang, and that was associated with the astronauts, and things that you would boil and bag things. So I remember we had white bread that
Mhm.
was toasted, and you had a boil and bag of
Wow.
creamed chip beef, which is referred to as shit on a shingle. Um, and so the comfort food of the grandmother and all of that I never had.
Okay. Hmm.
So I don't have. I mean, I could tell you what my when I'm upset and I'm looking for that go-to comfort food. I like to have I can't have caffeine, but a nice cup of decaf tea and some sourdough bread that's toasted with really good cultured butter. That's my go-to.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. So, speaking about the comfort food, it sounds like here in the US, macaroni and cheese, mac and cheese might be indeed that box that sits in people's cupboards. But your book, which is fantastic, we have it right here, shows that this dish carries centuries of history. So when did you realize that mac and cheese had a much deeper story than people think?
Well, so my involvement in this topic and started as a COVID project. And I was what I put together a course for to put on that was put online, and as a distraction to what was going on at the university. We were all in very severe lockdown and really needed a distraction. Um, and what I found really interesting is the connection between Italian food history, pasta and cheese, and how that evolved into moving out of Italy into France, into England, over to the United States, and how all of that transpired. But initially, my interest was the Italian part of it. One, because Americans kind of I found were really unaware that of the Italian origins, and Italians as well about their own food history. So I begin in ancient Rome. I go all the way back to ancient Rome, where there is a dish called a placenta,
Mm-hmm.
160 BCE, Cato the Elder, and he had a dish that was a dough that was shaped into pasta, so shaped into a pasta shape. It was round and flat, um, mixed with cheese. There was an element of sweetness which came through honey, but it's not a dessert because
Mm-hmm.
there was no concept of dessert in ancient Rome.
Hmm.
So that was all put together and then baked. But the importance of it is not just the hardware of it, but the software, in that it was a ritual dish that was associated with gathering together. The recipe for it is enormous. It would have served a lot of people. And uh, the feelings that would be associated with smelling the food when it arrived, remembering who had made it in the past, wondering how it's going to be this year, just as you do at any holiday. Remembering when it was wonderful and awful, and then that whole experience that you're experiencing as a collective, forging food memories with the food stuff itself. And so what happens is that we have this dish and we go through 800 years. Now, there's another recipe compilation that also has a dish that is related to the macaroni and cheese dish as well. But then we go through 800 years with no cookbook in Italy.
Wow.
Uh, when it resurfaces, then we see a direct thread from ancient Rome to what was called lasagne,
Mm-hmm.
and but it's not lasagna is. It's important to understand that lasagna is a macaroni shape.
Like
Anything
lagana or
like
sanya, as
lagana
we
and
make it.
lasagna, and is exactly. So that even remains today. Okay, and things that are called macaroni. The term macaroni meant
Mm-hmm.
anything that was pasta, very similar to the way that we use pasta today. Macaroni was used then. So you've got small sheets, and we're not talking about lasagna that's baked in a thing and tomato sauce, and certainly not.
Mm-hmm.
But things that were about the size of your hand.
Okay.
And those were sheets of that size. There were noodles that were macaroni, gnocchi were macaroni, and a rolled up type of pasta was also that you would pull the rod out like macaroni a ferretto, pull the rod out, and that's very, very old shape of pasta. All of it was called macaroni. So when we see that lasagne, in Lassanis, also it was called, in the Middle Ages, we're still looking at a pasta and cheese dish. And it's important to understand, though, that cheese was the way of dressing macaroni,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the shape was. There weren't a whole bunch of all of these sauces and pastos and whatever. The way of dressing macaroni was macaroni and cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had Lenten times when where there was severe Lent, when you couldn't even have dairy, and that's when you would have to have something else like an agliata. I'm glad I can speak Italian here because I can't do that on other podcasts. Okay. So the agliata is walnuts and garlic that are smashed together, but it was an alternative thing when you couldn't have a macaroni and cheese dish. Okay. Um, so then we see it develop in Italy through the ages. However, at the same time in the Middle Ages, it's moving out of Italy. Why? Because of um, pilgrimages, wars, where these are all things that people are going to be moving around with their cooks. Pilgrimages are going to be moving people into Rome. There were three Jubilee years in the 14th century, and then wars, of course. A lot of maritime exploration going on and trade, and the international Gothic families that are moving around from castle hopping and intermarrying, taking with them their cooks all the while. So we do get, much to the chagrin of the Italians, the first recipe in 1390 that's called macaroni instead of lasagna or gnocchi or whatever. It's called macaroni, and it's a macaroni and cheese recipe. But again, in England in 1390, form of curry. But again, we're talking about the lasagna shape. So
Mhm.
it's that small squares of pasta, cheese, and butter.
Mhm.
Butter then, which is going to come back into the recipe in Italy.
Okay, wonderful. So it looks like we're eating history, right? When we take a bite of this recipe. So explain to us what do you mean by using the term, and if I pronounce it correctly, historiphagy, because history and phagos put together. So.
Right. But
Mhm.
historiography is just all of the history. But what I'm talking about, hands-on history is something that I propose in the book on macaroni and cheese, where I'm signposting history throughout with recipes that um, that allow the reader to either really put their hands on the food and make the food in the modern kitchen, um, while retaining a certain amount of the historical aspect of it. Because what I want to encourage people to do is enter into the wonderful dimension that of history that food alone allows,
Mhm.
which is making the food, smelling it, having your hands on it, cooking it, and then embodying history physically,
Mhm.
which is just the most wonderful part of it. So I signpost the changes in the dish, from I include actually that dish that I described from Cato the Elder, and then through the Middle Ages, Renaissance dishes, and moving on then into France, England, and etc. And there are a couple of different perspectives on this. One is very archaeological, where they say, "Oh, you need, we're going to grind the wheat, and then we're going to make the cheese." And I don't get that deep down in the weeds because I want to encourage people to actively take part.
Mhm.
And I liken this to the experience of listening to classical music, particularly, the Baroque period, where the instruments are not the same, the music hall is not the same. Ingredients, the experience of being there, the tempos you don't know. But no one's going to stop listening to classical music just because all of that is different.
Mhm.
And the same thing I would like to encourage with historical recipes.
Mhm. And also in your research, whether it's through your Instagram account and your publications, you on one hand challenge some of the biggest myths out there, and we'll talk about it, but in a way to not pointing fingers but to educate both parties of the equation, because I from Rome came here, never seen mac and cheese in my entire life until I went to a supermarket, so the blue box everyone is familiar with, so I would instinctively say that is not Italian, and then on the other hand, maybe someone that is from the US said, no, that's our that's our creation. No,
Exactly.
indeed, there is a Roman. So I actually love, I love following everything that you publish because there is always something to learn. And the same thing, like of traditions that might start in a country, then become famous in somewhere else, and then they're brought back. A little bit like pizza, or a little bit like the Mediterranean diet that was not defined as such in Italy, but actually from outside Italy. So would you like to a little bit elaborate on that of, kind of reality versus romanticism of these, some of the concepts that we so dearly cling on to?
Yes. As far as this recent book, one of them is uh, that you probably have heard that Catherine de' Medici, she went to France and entered into those kitchens like a bulldozer and basically whipped those French people into shape and got them on the program. And thanks to her and Italy, I mean, bringing this, that, and the other, and recipes and ice cream and how many I don't know. It's a long list of things that she supposedly brought. Now, um, she was an orphan who, in order to just like keep her alive, because she was such a chess piece, um, she was put into a convent, and at age 13, then she went to she was betrothed because she was a chess piece, and it was just convenient to move her over to France and have her then marry into the royal family there. Now, France was already the cultural center of Europe. Italy was still reigning as far culinarily, but she was a 13-year-old girl. The audacity of the thought of her going there and revolutionizing anything is just it's just laughable. And that's a one of the myths that's really clung to. And it's interesting how that one came out because she was always thought of as the evil queen. She was called the Black Queen, and that whole story, which came out from the French, also applied to her. Well, she brought luxury, and the French, of course, are against luxury, but she kind of forced it on us, but then the whole thing turned around over the centuries and became this admiration of her and how she had brought all of that into France. So,
Mhm.
so that's one thing. Um, a, as far as you've touched on that the most sensitive point, which is probably the Mediterranean diet. Again, a diet with a capital D that uh, I have I have so much to say about that I'll try to keep it toned down. But what is the Mediterranean, and what is a Mediterranean diet that everyone can put together and agree on, that is something that is also health giving? So, um, the Mediterranean diet, the idea of eat your vegetables, it used to be also consume a great deal of cereals, and that idea has really shrunk because so many people were getting type 2 diabetes. Um, it has somehow become Mediterraneanized, the eat your vegetables idea that everyone already knows is what we need to do.
Mhm.
Uh, Making an intangible, what was it called? It's
Patrimony,
They're right, the intangible heritage out of food that and making that into a diet idea. If you read the script of what the Mediterranean diet is, it's neighborliness, festivals, markets, uh, husbandry. Now, take that idea and put any other diet, the Nordic, the Baltic Sea diet, the traditional Chinese, traditional Mexican. It all kind of will square into the same thing because we're talking about people being together and eating. Now,
Mhm.
Italians have this special relationship with it, but the way that the Mediterranean diet is set up, I mean, that's another thing. But if you look also at the coveted Sunday lunch, you start off with crostini and cheeses with salumi, and then we move on to a carbohydrate. A carbohydrate it can be rice, polenta, pasta, and then we move on to the meat course. And now, if you're in Tuscany, you've got a nice piece of meat and maybe some peas with pancetta and the potatoes. After which, maybe you then have the insalata, dessert. I have difficulty finding the Mediterranean diet in that coveted meal. And we all know because this is something that everyone, this is you go to an Italian restaurant. Where is the Mediterranean diet on that menu? Where again you've got the antipasti and the pasta and the and meat and then you'll have the sformato, the verdura grigliata, and potatoes, which is the standard vegetable representation. Okay,
Mhm.
so I do have a 35-page thing on academia.edu if anyone wants to look at it.
So we're going to take a little break, but we're not going to give up on talking about what these traditional diets include. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Do you love Italian food? Want to learn the secrets of homemade pasta, sauces, and traditional recipes, just like Nana used to make? At Mondo Italiano, our authentic Italian cooking classes bring the taste of Italy right to Pittsburgh. From fresh pasta to regional specialties, every class is a delicious journey through Italy's culinary traditions. Spots fill quickly, so reserve your seat today. Call us at 412-478-2681 or find us online. Mondo Italiano, where Italy comes alive one dish at a time.
Un caffè, per favore. For more than 35 years, Pittsburgh has started its mornings with La Prima Espresso. From freshly roasted beans from around the world to the perfect espresso or cappuccino, every cup is crafted with care. Stop by and enjoy the warmth of our baristas and familiar faces, or bring the taste of Italy home. Order online today at laprima.com. La Prima Espresso, Pittsburgh's coffee. We're back with Karima Moyer-Nocchi, the author of The Epic History of Macaroni and Cheese from Ancient Rome to Modern America. And again, what I do find striking, a striking part of your work is, again, how you challenge these romantic ideas about food, and especially also with Chewing the Fat, which again is another fascinating read. When we often idolize traditional diets, we overlook what they actually represent. So when we talk about those times of war, there was scarcity, there was malnutrition, and it is important that we understand that. Tell us a little bit about some of the learnings and the findings about stretching the ingredients, and what they tell us, what was happening in the kitchen about the lives of the people making the food, the daily life in the past.
Yeah, I while I know that the idealization of la cucina povera is about honoring people and the resilience, etc. It has been made into a kind of the things that are included in the idea of the cucina povera. I mean, as soon as you got ravioli and even pasta, um, you're talking about people who didn't have food, and they're not ticking things off of a rustic menu. So I want to be as generous as possible here. But in my interviews with these women, there was a repetition of food. The most striking was the carbonara, the Giuditta, who spent her family spent 8 months of the year in the mountains, making charcoal, and breakfast, lunch, and dinner was polenta. Then you had your foraged foods that went with it. They brought with them some cheese. They would have some other things brought to them. It's a repetition of food that was a substandard diet. Now, the difference for them, though, for these women that I interviewed, is that prior to that, people were actually dropping dead from starvation.
Mhm.
The fascist period, which moved that into just being a substandard diet, um, seemed different to them. And uh, things that we think of as standard Italian things like tomatoes. I interviewed several where they had never had tomatoes, or the tomatoes were only in the form of the conserva. So I don't even remember how you say that in English. Tomato paste,
Mhm.
tomato paste, right? So and you would go to the shop and they would wrap it in a piece of paper, and you'd take a little bit of that home. That was the story of tomatoes, but the whole zucchini, eggplant idea was not something that was any way diffused. In fact, people like to say there isn't an Italian cuisine. There are only regional ones, but throughout the region, you certainly didn't have tomato, zucchini, eggplant, and peppers. Um, those are all ideas that came out much later. And what you were saying before of the idea of the Mediterranean diet came from the United States, but then because it exalted Italian food or was construed as that, then you have this movement of foods throughout Italy with this pride. Now this pride is coming out particularly in around when was it 1986 when when Italy had also won the World Cup.
Mhm.
So the coinciding of the pride in the food and the pride in soccer also came out. It wasn't until 1993, so we're talking the Mediterranean diet, 1993, when there was a great conference in again in the United States with scholars at Harvard and etc. that the Mediterranean diet idea was galvanized,
Mhm.
okay, into a diet that didn't exist in Italy. It wasn't based on supposedly on Anchel Keys and his study of the seven countries study. Um, it was a constructed idea of a diet.
Mhm.
So anyway, that's my difficulty with it. It also reduced the Mediterranean, which includes also North Africa, but it was Italy, Greece, and Spain, and then it kind of Spain got moved out of there, and it was just Italy and Greece, and then only sort of certain areas in Italy, and then it, Italy was very eager to adopt the idea of the Mediterranean diet.
Mhm. So going back to our beloved macaroni and cheese, since we talked about a queen, although nothing to do with the recipe specifically, we talked about survival. So where does macaroni and cheese fall on that spectrum between necessity and luxury?
Well, what happens to macaroni and cheese in its most vibrant period of time was the 19th century.
Mhm.
Um, it had been a luxury food in Italy. When it was picked up by the French, it became a refined food. The French were very much about rejecting those Italian foodways. They pulled macaroni and cheese into their inner sanctum, taking it out of the clumsy hands of the Italians, getting rid of all of their spices because the Italians had all along been putting sugar and cinnamon on it with the cheese. Generally, the cooking process was boiling it in a meat broth,
Mhm.
but the cheese was the sugar and cinnamon was applied. A, it is a standard preparation, like we would do salt and pepper. The French were going to have none of that, so we moved from luxury to refinement, and then going into the 19th century. About the middle of the 19th century, Americans are sort of looking around to see what their cuisine was and if it was a thing. And they too started putting out their own cookbooks called the United States Cookbook, the National Cookbook, and brought macaroni and cheese into their inner sanctum. While that's going on, you have a great exodus from Europe coming into the United States, mixing all of that up and adding to a concept of cuisine. The Italians are going to come a little bit later. So there's a sense of the of reform and of class and of getting people fed. All the while that that is going on, there are innovations in technology that it's making it easier to produce macaroni. Also in transportation, making the distribution easier. Then there's the great discovery of gluten. And gluten is the miracle food that it is basically the plant equivalent of meat.
Mhm.
And so despite our relationship now, and gluten is the bad guy, it was called flesh forming. And so that was something that social reformers were going to grab onto as a way to get the masses fed. Now that the industry, there was a hydraulic press and things like that, the industry was going to develop that. So um, then we move on into having more Americans who are producing this food. Um, you have a great exodus of Italians during what was the Panic of 1873, and following that again in the 1880s with the escaping from cholera. So the Italians are also building up their industry.
Mhm.
And this is going to bring more people into eating this food because of thinking that it is, first of all, it's becoming less expensive, and also the health qualities that are applied to it. But the problem is that the American macaroni didn't have that flesh forming thing because they didn't have durum wheat. The Italian product was made with germ wheat. The American product was made with soft wheat. So it was always inferior. And yet it wasn't less expensive because the Americans needed to pay their workers more. And that becomes a problem. And they try to resolve that problem by applying tariffs to the Italian product. But that moment of cholera is also very important because the Italians were, and the prejudice that was aligned with them, and there was also them being Mediterranean and being Catholic. When that cholera thing broke out, suddenly the Italians and their food and their imports went on. There was a smear campaign against the Italians, and a smear campaign against Italian macaroni. They're dirty, they're fly ridden. They're making their pasta next to tanneries. Tanneries are kind of are where you make leather, and chemicals and urine and things are used to do that. And so all kinds of advertising, negative advertising about that. But the Italian Americans were also involved. It was good for their business, for their macaroni, in the sense that they advertised themselves as having a clean industrial product, and
Mhm.
industrial products were important at the time.
Yeah.
So the smear campaign went on with the Italians. The Italians encouraged then the government to apply tariffs to the incoming macaroni so that the local product could be promoted and people would be encouraged to buy American. All the while, though, the American product was being packaged just like the Italian ones in the same boxes with the same colors. Italian names, even if you weren't Italian, were put on it because of this idea that the Italian product was the quality product.
Mhm.
Um, and then they would go on to resolve it because they finally got it into their heads that it wasn't just a question of applying tariffs and getting people to eat low quality macaroni, but planting the Durham wheat.
Mhm. Wow, so it's fascinating that we started to see the birth of Italian sounding phenomenon back in the day, and some politics that seem to be quite current in this dish that goes back all the way to Roman times. It is fascinating. I knew that this was going to be an eye opener, opening conversation with you, Karima. You're in your history digging and academic background really your reputation precedes yourself. So we have this Italian and American soul, the conflict resolved, which is in the favor of a better quality product for everyone. Start growing the correct the durum here. So you have transitioned, between cultures and foods that you were exposed to. So how does this living between cultures, how does that shape your relationship with food as an adult and as a researcher, as a food historian?
Um, there's something I do in my own home in order to bring together what I know and what I have learned about let's foreign foods and Italian food, and using those two things to bring them together in in creative ways that exalt the Italian culinary experience that I have here.
Mhm.
And that's something for example, the way I might spice and do an aglio olio peperoncino, but with a my own blend of curry on top of that and mixing that in together.
Mhm.
So those kinds of things that just as a person, in my own home, bringing people together through those kinds of experiences. I also, there's a place in town here, they invite me every now they invite me every now and then to um, to cook at their restaurant, and a I've done a Mexican dinner and a Middle Eastern dinner and an Indian dinner, a Vietnamese dinner. And the Italians are very interested and open, which is really pleasing to me.
Mhm.
We have really great evenings.
Yeah. So yes, because food it's a living. It's living. It's not just standard by the recipes that have been deposited 100 years ago. They reflect where we're at. The ingredients are available, the techniques, and even the ingenuity of each one of us. The other day, I wanted to make cacio e pepe, but I had these beautiful Calabrian peppers. I said, "How about it spicy?" And all of a sudden, in my kitchen, that was a hit. You've been very busy with your public speaking engagements. You were here recently in the US. So would you like to tell us a little bit about where you've been and potentially other engagements that you might have coming up in the next month or so that I will bring up your website where they can also get more information about your work, previous work, and this current work. But tell us a little bit about your talks that you have done recently in the US.
So yes, I was for my book launch. I was for February. I was in DC. I was invited by the George Washington Presidential Library, where I had done a fellowship, and the to give a talk, and also the Library of Congress, where I was very honored to have been invited there. They did a whole spread with both of them, actually, also the Presidential Library, with food and a historical dish, and the talk. And the Library of Congress did a display of historical books, cookbooks that I had referred to. So that was a wonderful experience. And also then I went to New York, where I spoke at the Museum of Food and Drink. So it's called MoFad.
Mhm.
Another lovely experience. Because I was in New York, they did a dish that was based on an 1896 recipe from a Oscar Chirsky. He was the maitre d' at the Waldorf Astoria and also Delmonico's. So it kind of gave that New York sort of flavor to it. And in April, I'm going to be returning again. There is at France's Tavern. I hope that people would look into this. France's Tavern is in New York. It is an old historic a tavern, and I'm going to be giving a talk there about mostly about the macaroni and cheese, England, and the 18th century.
Mhm.
Then and that's on the 28th of April, and then on the 29th of April, there's going to be an event at the Yale Club again in New York.
Mhm.
Uh,
Wonderful.
So I look forward to other invitations if people want to have me come out, perhaps in Philadelphia, where you're from, and I'm ready
Absolutely.
to
So
travel.
we'll keep the doors open here at Istituto Mondo Italiano, Pittsburgh, actually, to be uh,
Pittsburgh.
exact. But so, Karima, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Again, food is not just food; it's history, identity, and memory all at once. And today's conversation reminds us that even the simplest dish can carry centuries of human experience. But unfortunately, our time together is up for the day. Il Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning in into the program. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. And also, don't forget to share this podcast because sharing is caring. So I would like to thank my guest one more time, Karima Moyer-Nocchi. Her latest publication, The Epic History of Macaroni and Cheese from Ancient Rome to Modern America, will make indeed a great read, along with her previous publications, Chewing the Fat and The Eternal Table. We want to thank our sponsors, Istituto Mondo Italiano and La Prima Espresso. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao.
Grazie mille.